This is a bonus video for those of you who are interested in learning how to create your own image hose nozzles. So the image hose nozzles are essentially a bunch of little images that you draw and you group together and then they become a brush. So if I choose this shrubs brush here and I just click with my mouse, you can see it's just making all these different shrubs, and I maybe made about, I don't know, 5 or 10 different shrubs. So there's not really a whole lot of variety in this particular brush, but they're all different sizes and colors, and when you paint with them you get a nice shrub result like so. So I'm going to show you how to do this. So the trick is you want to create a canvas with equally divisible proportions, like 1000 by 1000 pixels or 2000 by 2000 pixels. That way you can divide it into an equal grid. So we'll go to File and New, and we'll change our dimensions to pixels. And let's do 1000 by 1000. The bigger you do this, the more room you're going to have for images, but you don't want to do it too big. So I find 1000 or 2000 is a pretty good range. And now we have our canvas here. I'll zoom out a little bit so we can see it. And then the easiest way to divide this into equal parts is to turn on the layout grid, which is hiding under the perspective drawing menu. If you click and you hold on it, you'll get it there. It's this third option. And you'll have to click the eyeball to turn it on. And if it's not set up the way you want, you can change the number of cells in the grid. Do that, you have to find the menu for it, which is under the window menu, and then it is under composition panels and layout grid. It should pop up in a palette, and you can then change these divisions here, higher or lower. Now, this number of cells defines how many images are going to be in your nozzle. If this is a higher number, you're going to have to draw more images, and your image is going to have more variety. That might make it look more detailed, but it also might be way too many images to draw. If it's too low, you're not going to have enough variety. So I think a number between 6 and 20 is a good number for most types of objects. We'll go ahead and just stick with 9 here. So I'll close the layout grid. We don't need that anymore. And we can go ahead and start deciding what we're going to make. I think for this example, we'll do a bird's brush. I know I already have one in here, but I'll show you how you can go ahead and make one. So you want to create a new layer for each cell that's in your grid. So we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. So I'll just create 9 layers here really quick. The canvas isn't going to count. This is just going to be the background. So don't put anything on the canvas. And you want to make sure that you fill layer 1, cell 1, layer 2, cell 2. You don't want to put them all on the same layer. They have to be on separate layers. This is going to control each object that comes out of your brush. So we're going to go to layer 1. I'm going to pick black, and I'm going to pick the scratchboard tool. Now you want your objects to have a transparent background, so you have to be careful if you're blending and doing different things. If I hide the canvas layer, you can see this checkerboard represents transparency. So for instance, if I were to draw this bird in here and then maybe blend it a little bit, in blending it you might not see any difference because it's on a white background, but if I were to add a black background really quick, or maybe a dark gray background, you'll see that blending it added some white fringe, and that's just kind of what happens when you blend. So you have to watch out for that because this white fringe is going to come in with your brush, and you probably don't want it to do that. So I recommend that you try not to really blend anything if you can help it. You may need to in some cases, and if that's the case, what you can do to remedy the fringe is you can turn on preserve transparency, and then you can paint over that fringe with another color. So let's go ahead and put in some proper birds here. So we'll do a couple wings and a little bit of a tail and a head. These don't have to be super detailed because they're going to be kind of small when we paint them in. So just little silhouettes. Make sure you move to the next layer before you do the next cell. And this one will be going kind of up in the air. Go to the next layer for the next cell, and we'll create another bird. Go to layer 4. And layer 5. And layer 6. Just keep going through and filling in your birds or whatever objects you're making an image hose out of. We'll have one that's maybe kind of going to the side here. And we'll do one more. So now we have a nice flock of birds, and these are going to be kind of distant, so we do want them to be a little blurry. So again, we can blend this a little bit. We're going to have to fix the white fringe after we blur. So we'll start with the last layer here, layer 9. We'll go to blur. I'm just going to paint over it really quickly with a couple strokes, and do that to layer 8, layer 7, 6, 5, and so on. Just hitting them all with the same amount of blur. And then I'm going to turn on preserve transparency, select the scratchboard tool, and then I'm going to make sure that I paint over the birds with black, and that will get rid of any of that white fringe that might be there. Make sure you get them all, otherwise they're going to have a little white outline, and that's going to drive you crazy when you try to paint with this brush. So there we go. We have our little birds. They're looking good. You want to make sure that you turn off all the background layers, like this canvas and everything else, and you only have your objects showing that you want to be in the brush with a transparent background. Then you want to group just those objects together, only those objects in that group. We'll call this birds, and we'll go ahead and we will save this. We'll do a save as, and we'll save this as our master copy. It's good to save your master copy because you may want to go back to this and make some adjustments if you find that it's not working the way you want it to. And sometimes getting these brushes the way you want them is trial and error. Sometimes you might decide that you want to change the brush later, and maybe you would want to make these birds white instead of black. Well, you could go into your master copy and you could change all these layers and then save it as a new brush. What's important is that you leave a little bit of extra space around your objects. You don't want to go all the way to the edge of this cell, because if you do, your images might get kind of cramped together. So I like to leave a little bit of space between all of my objects. Now, to make these into an Image Hose nozzle, we want to close the group, and we will go to our Nozzle Libraries palette, and we will go to the submenu icon here in the top right, and we'll go to Make Nozzle from Group. Now that's going to automatically make a new canvas here. What you want to do is just immediately go to File and Save As, and just save it as whatever you want it to be. I'm going to call this Birds. You want to save it as a RIF format. Go to Save, and then just go ahead and just close this immediately. Then you can go ahead and hide the birds layer. We'll create a new layer. I'll go ahead and turn on the background so we can see. And on this new layer, we can start painting our test to make sure that this brush is working the way we want. So to load the brush, you next have to go to the submenu icon again, the Nozzle Libraries palette, and go to Load Nozzle. And then you want to pick the nozzle, which is birds. And you can go ahead and paint. You'll have to select an Image Hose brush first. So let's try Spray Size P Angle W. That'll kind of spray the birds out. And we'll do a test and we'll see. Now, the bigger you make your brush, the bigger your birds are going to be. So I'm going to have to make my brush pretty small. And there you go. You have a huge flock of birds like from an Alfred Hitchcock movie. And you could do this with anything. You could do it with grass. You could do it with rocks, seashells, anything. I'm not going to show you how to make all of these brushes, but really quickly I'll just kind of go over how I made some of these brushes. So for the grass brushes, what I did is I just made a few either clumps of grass, like so, or I just made some individual grass blades. And after you've made them, you probably want to add a little bit of detail to them. So I turned on preserve transparency, and I gave highlights to some of them. To go to that other layer, to some of them I gave shadows. So I just made very detailed blades of grass, and then when you have enough individual little grass blades and you start painting with them, what you get is you get a grass brush, which looks something like this. You can see I can make little grass, I can make my brush bigger, I can make bigger grass. And really, when you put it all together in one big pattern, you can't see all the individual grass blades as long as you do enough. Now, you might need to change some of these. You might want to change the color, and in that case, you would want to use the linear size P color or any of the color variants of this Image Hose brush, and then select a secondary color by clicking the additional color button here. And you could pick a color like orange if you wanted some orange grass. You can tint it any color you want, Now it's going to mix with whatever the original color is for the object. You can adjust the level of tinting by changing the grain. And let's look at one more thing, which is the shrub, which you will see in lesson number 3. And I believe that the way that I did that was I went ahead and put in something probably with the square chalk brush that was kind of a brown color. You'll notice that when I wanted to switch back to my regular brush, I had to switch my color to my main color again. So anytime you go to that additional color, you'll have to change it back. It's kind of obnoxious, but that's just how it works. So I'm using this square chalk brush with a paper texture that has a lot of texture. And then I'm going to use the coarse oily blender to pull straight up on it. And that makes kind of a shrub kind of shape pretty easily. Now, of course, you would want to refine this and make it, a little more detailed than I'm going to. I'm just going to do a quick one. We can use the detail oils brush over that and draw in some more kind of sticks for our shrub. And then I mentioned earlier that blending is going to kind of mess things up. So what you're going to have to do is you're going to have to evaluate this on a dark background and look for this fringe. And when you find fringe, turn on preserve transparency and then just paint over it so that it's not there anymore. And then you could go ahead and you could shade this if you want to. Now I recommend when you shade it that you don't do too much shading, because if you establish a light on one side or the other side, when you go to paint this in, your light's always going to have to be on that side. So for instance, if I shade the left side darker, the sunlight in my composition or the light source is always going to have to be on the right if I use this brush. So what I do is I just make it kind of neutral, and I don't worry about adding any kind of specific shading on it as far as the light source. I do that after I've already painted it into the composition. So you could do something like that to add some bristles. You could darken the bottom of it. That helps it look a little more natural. Sometimes adding a drop shadow to it helps. Like if you wanted to add a little dark area underneath for where the shrub connects, you would of course want to make them merge together on the same layer, like so. But then you have something like that. And then you could do several more shrubs. You could do some green ones and some small ones and some tall ones. You could even take this same layer if you wanted to, and you could just duplicate it. You can right click on it and go to duplicate layer, move it over, and you could go to effects, tonal control, adjust colors, and you can change the hue of it to maybe, let's say, green. And then we could transform it using the free transform tool to squish it down and stretch it out. And now we have a whole different shrub without having to really redraw the whole thing. And this helps keep your images kind of consistent. You could also go and blend it more if you wanted to. See, I could keep blending on this. And then of course I want to turn on preserve transparency. And in this case, what you want to do rather than try to paint over it is you want to use the distorto tool. You want
and
to
then
pull
I can make
straight
this
up
into a
and
custom
pull this
nozzle
green
by going
right
to
on top
make
of
nozzle
that
from
white.
group.
And that gets rid of it. And then of course I could group these together into shrubs. You know, I would want to fill in the rest of these cells, of course. Then load the nozzle, and then if you want to add a nozzle to your nozzle library, you'll go to the submenu icon in the nozzle libraries. You want to make sure that you have a nozzle loaded first. So let's say the birds, if we want to add that, we have that loaded. Then we go to the submenu icon again, and we go to add nozzle to library. It will add birds to our library. I'm not going to add it here because I already have one, but if you click OK, then it would show up here in your palette, and you can move it around if you want. You can also give these little icons like I did here. What you'll want to do is you'll want to make an image that is 200 by 200 pixels. So you go to File, New, go 200 by 200 at 72 dpi. And you can go ahead and paint it in, save it as a JPEG. And then when you want to load it, select the nozzle that you want to apply it to. Go to the submenu dialog here in the nozzle libraries. Go to Nozzle Library View, and then Set Custom Icon, and then locate the JPEG file that you want to set as your icon. So in conclusion, just about anything can be made into a custom image hose nozzle. And this is important because if you want to achieve a level of realism in your paintings, you need a lot of detail, and sometimes creating detail one object at a time isn't efficient, and this just makes it a lot easier. You can make all your grass and rocks and clouds in one go, and then you can just draw from these brushes anytime you want those objects. And then you can, of course, as we did here, change the color and manipulate them to fit any kind of composition. So now you know how to make your own image hose nozzles, and if you want, you can include some of them in your assignment paintings for this class.